Welcome everyone to another observability clinic. Today's topic is accelerate cloud migration, how to modernize faster with Dynatrace. My name is Andy Grabner and today I have two guests with me. I start with the lady, Kayla. Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. How about you?
Very good. Thanks for being here. Also with Lucas. Lucas, how are you doing?
Hi, Andy.
Hey, it seems the two of you have backgrounds for Perform. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And the reason for this is that we are all in the preparation of Perform, of our upcoming event. And you have a lot of great content to actually talk about at Perform at the breakouts. I'm sure you will mention the session, but we also want to take the chance of delivering that content and showing what you have prepared in a more technical deep dive way now as part of my observability clinics. And with this, I want to say, folks, if you are seeing this now on YouTube or Dynatrace University, if you have any questions, make sure to follow up with Lucas and Kayla. I assume they can find you on LinkedIn or any other social media platforms or by email if you have any follow-up questions. And also on Dynatrace University, you can find the slides as well, because I think there's the one or the other link in there that you can follow up. But with this, Lucas, I want to hand it over to you and show us how our customers can accelerate cloud migration and how to modernize faster with Dynatrace.
Yep, exactly. So if you haven't already seen the Accelerate Cloud Migration, how to modernize faster with Dynatrace breakout track yet, be sure to check that out on the Perform videos as well. So you want to move to the cloud. Today, leaders are under immense pressure to move quickly to public cloud. About 70% of companies have already moved some workloads to the public cloud. That really means that there's a lot of workloads still out there in legacy environments. So according to Gartner, infrastructure and operation leaders often prioritize a lift and shift approach. And really that may not be the best way to get your applications to the cloud. It may be better to rewrite and re-release those in a cloud native way. According to McKinsey, cloud's going to provide over $1 trillion of EBITDA to the Fortune 500 by the end of the decade. But really only 7% of this comes from cost optimization of IT infrastructure. So again, if you're looking at that lift and shift application migration, you're going to miss out on some of the key benefits of cloud. Transforming to cloud native really is game changing, which is a theme for us here at Perform. So that same $1 trillion, 75% of that's going to come from boosting innovation. So think about, adding agility to how your business operates. Think about accelerating new use cases. Think about spending less time in R&D on, the basic building blocks of R&D and more about, providing that innovation. So what is cloud native? Here's a few principles. Again, cloud native is not about where your applications are hosted, but how they're created and deployed. So I'll let you read through the list quickly. There's a lot here, some important things to take away. It's about automation. It's about being stateless. It's about being loosely coupled. So if cloud native is so great, why hasn't everybody already done it? Well, sometimes it can be hard. It increases complexity, there's rapid change, there's lots of new technologies, there's even scarce talent for all of these new technologies. And close to our hearts at Dynatrace, you also have a lack of visibility in these cloud native environments. Every year, Dynatrace does a global CIO survey, and 74% of CIOs say that cloud native technologies are leading to more manual effort, more time just spent keeping the lights on. 63% of CIOs say that the complexity of their cloud environments has surpassed the human ability to manage them. So with these challenges, how can Dynatrace help? Kayla, you want to take us through that?
Yeah, for sure. Let's get started.
I'll give you some of the use cases we hear from customers and prospects all the time. And you can kind of give us some details on how Dynatrace helps on those. So first off, in my legacy environment, I have lots of, servers and VMs and applications that are all legacy. I don't even have a good inventory of it. Every year we try to do an inventory, but it's out of date as soon as we finish it. How can Dynatrace help with that?
So Lucas, just looking at the auto detection from our one agent, right now we're taking a look at the Smartscape topology screen. You can see we have an agent at the host layer and it automatically detects any processes, services that are running on that application. So it just gives you a good idea of what may be running there, very high level overview of your application. We also would automatically instrument to the front end of your web app to get a bit of a user experience perspective as well. If we take a quick look at some of these services, maybe I'll just click on one, you'll be able to see some of the other services that it may be communicating with in the environment. You can see I get a very high level view of all of the other services in the environment at the moment. We'd be able to see the same thing at the process layer as well. You can see which other processes this may be communicating with and just zoom in. Once again, this is just at a very, very high level what we're looking at. So we're able to see some of the names here.
Cool. And maybe
Great,
I would love to ask a question too, if that's allowed, Lucas, Kayla.
Sure.
So because what I always hear, and it's great that you do this role play between you and Kayla, I always hear the question then, so this looks nice on a single host, but how would I automate the rollout of all of this? What does it take to actually get this type of visibility? And I know you mentioned the one agent, but my question to you, Kayla, now is, what are the options for our users to roll this out at scale? Because I know we have some organizations that have, hundreds and thousands of hosts.
Yeah, so if we're talking with something like the Kubernetes operate or the Dynatrace operator would automatically roll that out to all of your nodes, pods, automatically detect those in your environment as well. From an automation perspective. I don't know, Lucas, if you had anything to add to that.
What about some of our legacy environments where we maybe use Ansible or Chef or Puppet or things like that?
Yeah, that's awesome. So that means, like with any, you would say, modern tool out there, we have automation APIs and automated ways to put this into your CloudFormation stakes, your Terraform scripts, and so on. That's awesome. Yeah. Nice.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So since we talked about rolling it out everywhere, what about blind spots? I don't know everything that's in my environment. So what if I miss a host? How would we identify that?
So there are a couple ways that Dynatrace would identify that. We have two catch-all mechanisms at the service layer, one being requests to unmonitored hosts, the other one being requests to public networks. If I go back to request to unmonitored hosts here, we're able to see a list of different domains that it makes calls out to. And the same thing would be request to public networks. If we take a look at the list of requests that we have here, we would have a list of domains that we're able to see.
Very cool. And just a follow-up question that I always get, and I'm sorry if I'm destroying now, hopefully not your presentation's flow, but I really always find this fascinating how we get this information, because this is, as you said, just installing the one agent, and then this is on a service level. That means we're instrumenting code and we actually see which requests your Java.NET Node.js app is making, which URL to which endpoint. And then if we don't have any agent installed over there at that endpoint, we still show you that data and say, hey, you are making requests to these hosts, to these services, and automatically get full visibility, even though in systems where you have not rolled out Dynatrace yet. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Andy.
Yeah.
And Kayla, what are some things that we would find in public networks, and what kind of things would we find in request to unmonitored hosts?
So if we take a look at, maybe I'll just filter by one of these domains here so we can get a better idea. Right now I'm filtering by one of the requests to public networks. Looks like a weather app that may be supporting one of our applications we have here. And there are two different requests that it does split by. We also have the option to potentially monitor this as a separate service. if we did want to split it out. If you do that, Davis can automatically add it into the AI engine, and it can become part of your root cause analysis instead of just grouping it into this general request to public networks or general catch-all. So that can be beneficial from a problem detection perspective.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be great for like our SaaS providers and things like that we use.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because does this also mean, you brought up a good point with the SaaS providers, you have open weather map here, but assume you're calling, as you said, like a Salesforce and Office 365 or whatever. And then if you basically say group these URLs to this external together to, let's say, Microsoft or AWS or Salesforce, then Dynatrace will automatically monitor these as an entity, will automatically do some baselining for me, and will also alert me in case these third-party services that my software relies on is all of a sudden acting outside of what I'm expecting, outside of SLAs, for instance.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So now I have a good handle on, how I find my blind spots, how I understand my external dependencies. What about bottlenecks? How would I identify, bottlenecks in my current architecture?
It's a great question, Lucas. I guess one of the key ways that you can identify bottlenecks is by looking at one of the drill down features we have at the service layer called service flow. So here we're able to see any outgoing calls that are originating from this Nginx for customer front end service we have here. So we're able to see exactly where those calls are being made by, and in this case, it's filtered by response time. So we're able to see the percentage response time contribution that each of these services has. So we can see, maybe just looking at this flow here, this particular service has about a 48% response time contribution. We're able to see some calls to an authentication service. Oh, sorry, maybe let's look at the booking service. We have a 39% response time contribution there. And then we see some of the outgoing calls are being made to other services, one with 29% response contribution, and then two other services that we can expand with smaller response time contributions here. You also have the option to filter by throughput instead. So if you want to look at how many requests are each of those getting, looking at that same flow that we were previously looking at, that booking service, we're able to see that the database actually has the highest number of requests flowing to it, whereas credit card verification, although it does seem to have a significant amount of calls being made, is nowhere near what the database is, although this has a higher response time contribution for that service. So it can give you some ideas on what may be contributing to that.
This is, sorry if I interject again, but this is fascinating because for me, I used to do a lot of performance engineering and also capacity planning. For me, this is great input for capacity planners, knowing which components in your architecture are receiving how much traffic, but also are then contributing in terms of response time, so you can do better capacity planning on where you put more capacity to make sure that you can handle the load, or maybe you need just more compute power to make sure that the response times go down in case it's obviously a CPU bound activity that is executed there. Yeah.
Cool. So I'm also seeing a couple other things that would be super helpful as we start planning out our migration. So we kind of see, I see at the top, we've got an Nginx for microservices, and we have a backend web server right above it. I saw in the previous view, a breakout between synchronous communication and asynchronous. So I think that's really important. We learned earlier, some of those principles for cloud native is, loosely coupled and using asynchronous communication. So I can see, one of those is asynchronous. Everything else seems pretty synchronous. And then in the throughput, you were showing me that, every call to Nginx makes a call to that backend web service. So 784, 784. So those are pretty tightly coupled. So I think that, gives us some insights into, how we might need to re-architect that. I can also see DB1, my database there. So I cannot understand, what's calling the database, et cetera. So if maybe we're, doing it in multiple phases, we know what calls on that database. So we make sure that we move those things together. And I guess one last thing, what's the little icon between micro journey service and Nginx for microservices?
It's your load balancer. So if there are load balancers between anything, you'd be able to see that.
That's perfect. Since you can't put an agent on there, you can still identify that as a proxy chain.
Exactly.
I think it even shows up on the right side there, right? It actually tells me what proxy chain that is and also how much that is. That's really cool. How many requests go in, how many of those have failed, because it could be that a proxy is also a misconfigured proxy, could, redirect certain requests to the wrong environment or to nowhere, right? Misconfigured, and you would see failed requests here.
Or it could be overloaded.
Overloaded, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, great. So this is super helpful in sort of an already microservices environment. What about if we have kind of a legacy monolithic Java application or monolithic .NET application? How could we figure out, how we might want to break that up?
Awesome. Another great question, Lucas. So let's maybe take a look. Right now, we're looking at CPU consumption at the process layer. So on the CPU consumption screen, we're able to see which web services are responsible for the highest amount of contribution. Just looking at this page here, we already have a couple of custom services that are broken up. If you don't have any custom services quite yet, because that's going to be our next step in determining which microservices should we be creating, or maybe virtually creating microservices to determine how we should be refactoring our application. You can take a look at our method hotspot section here to get an idea of which endpoints may be good entry points to create or start virtually breaking up the monolith by looking at this hotspots page.
Great. So we'd identify them here with method hotspots, and then how would I create the custom service from that?
So if we take a look at our custom service page, like I said, we have a couple. Maybe let's take a look at check destination, since that was on our page previously. But typically you would define, you have two options. You can either define the entry point manually, or you have the option to find another entry point. Typically, I just recommend finding another entry point because it'll automatically populate for you. You can choose the appropriate process group, find which entry point you've decided to use from your method hotspots, and then it will help create your custom service. So it's fairly straightforward. Like I said, you also have the option to manually define it if you already know, but using the tool to help make sure everything's already synced in Dynatrace is very helpful.
So it's just as simple as that. I just find the class and method, and then I put that in as an entry point, and then suddenly I have a new microservice.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And I think this is great from, I mean, from my perspective, if I can recap what I just learned, right? You have an application and you want to make sure that in this, let's say, monolith or bigger service, you want to carve out, or you want to understand how certain pieces of that service actually work, kind of how to see it in isolation. With Dynatrace, you say, this little piece here, right? This is it has to do with check destination. And there's like, the developers told me there's two methods that might be called. So Dynatrace, please see the code behind those two methods as its own service. So you can actually then see how does the bigger part in the top call the smaller part in the back, and then we can go back to the service flow that we saw earlier and figure out, do we have tight coupling, do we have loose coupling, how are these individual modules within a larger code base interacting with each other, and all of this without making any code changes, just through point and click. Really cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a good sense of how we're kind of carving things up. The new platform is going to be based in the cloud. It's going to use Kubernetes. How can I understand that as my platform grows?
For sure. So let's maybe start with taking a look at AWS. If you are in the cloud, we also have a section I'll go into specifically on Kubernetes, but there is additional information that we can import in addition to what we get from being on the actual server, on the actual application itself. But you're able to see other aspects in your environment that could be to give that full picture view. So in the case of AWS, we're able to see any potential supporting services like Aurora or the API gateway, how that may be helping with your application, any load balancers, from your typical EC2 instances, and we can go in and drill down into these individual instances that you most likely have a one agent on. Or if you don't have the agent on it, then we would still be able to see which other EC2 instances you have in your environment. Any Lambda functions that you may be using in the case of AWS, so any serverless functions for other cloud providers. Any RDS instances, so managed databases, DynamoDB, and also from a storage perspective, any EBS volumes as well. So there's quite a lot of contextual information that you can get from this perspective. This is just at a very high level.
Before you go on, can I just ask a follow-up question there? So are you just kind of showing like CloudWatch metrics? Or are you somehow like combining that in context with other data that's coming from one agent?
So yeah, so what we're looking at right now is coming in through the CloudWatch API. If we do drill down to any of the EC2 instances, then you would see data from the agent itself. So you are seeing data directly from like AWS and data that's coming from having that agent as well.
So for something like RDS, would you also see kind of the SQL queries going to RDS? Or would you just see the CloudWatch metrics?
You should see the SQL queries at the service layer going to RDS. But that would be from like an agent perspective. At this layer, you would see, you just see more information on the individual instance.
That's great that you're combining those. Mm-hmm. What about Kubernetes?
When it comes to Kubernetes, it's going to be a very similar, way that it's set up, where you have information coming in through the Kubernetes API, as well as information that we're bringing in through the agent itself. So right now, a lot of what we're seeing is coming in through the Kubernetes API. So a number of namespaces, workloads, pods, overall cluster utilization, any events that are happening on the cluster as well. We take a look at maybe analyze nodes. These individual nodes you should be able to click on. And bring us to one of the hosts that are being monitored. So this would be your agent view, right? All this information we're seeing here from an agent level.
And then Kayla, before you move on, it's also showing vulnerabilities for my Kubernetes cluster. Again, all in context. I think this will be really important, as we move to the cloud. We might not have, the same level of protection or the same kind of security through obscurity that we might have in our local data center with everything being in the cloud.
Yeah, it definitely helps with that contextual information, bringing everything together.
I think, Lucas, maybe to add to this, because you just said as we move to the cloud, right, even though the cloud doesn't mean per se that everything is open, as long as you are making sure that you have all of your security settings right. But Dynatrace App Secure really tells you not only that you have a vulnerability, a well-known vulnerability, But as far as I know, and I've done some of these webinars before with some of our security experts, we also changed the risk factor, whether this was detected on a system that is either exposed to the public internet or the system has access to a database. Because like if you think about Log4Shell, if that is exposed to the internet and then people can get to it, it is obviously higher risk. Plus, if this is then an application that has access to your production database where all of your customer data is stored, then that's even higher, risk. And therefore, I think this is really great that we show these vulnerabilities, not only here in the context, but also give it our Davis security score. That is not only the score that we get from the vulnerability databases, but that we also then adjust based on, is this really a system that is exposed to the public, and does it also have access to any sensitive data?
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you have an observability clinic for that as well?
I happen to have at least one on that, exactly. Dynatrace AppSec, and we did another one on application security quality gates, where you can also identify some of these security problems fully automatically as part of your continuous delivery. So before it makes it into production, you can already stop vulnerabilities. Yeah.
Check that out later.
Yeah.
So speaking about our cloud migration, we've tried moving an application to the cloud before, and users complained about poor performance. In our testing, we didn't really even see a difference. The application performed poorly before and it performed poorly after. But you change something and then everyone starts to complain. How could you maybe have some empirical data to show whether our performance has improved or degraded, kind of before, during, and after the migration?
Awesome. Yeah, there's definitely a couple ways that we can do it. Let's maybe take a look at some of the comparisons that we have here. So right now I'm looking at the service layer. So you'd be able to compare at the service layer the number of failures before the migration and then after the migration, to see if there is an increase or decrease and where those changes are. In this case, I was using time a little bit earlier today with comparing to the week before, and we're able to see that there's a decrease in the number of failures, which is good for us. If there was an increase, you would be able to see where those increases are. Just scrolling down to see that's where the increase is, and these are some of the other failures, as well as potential root causes for those failures where you'd be able to drill down. It does seem like for this particular failure analysis, we also have related logs that are being brought in there contextually as well. So we get that additional information to help troubleshoot that.
And think about that, because Lucas, I happen to have a performance clinic I just recorded on logs in the context of traces. That means not only do I see that there's a difference between before and after the migration, also all of a sudden, without having to go to my log analytics tool, which might be some other tool sitting somewhere around and collecting its data in without context, I have all of the log messages in context here of the particular comparison. And that's pretty sweet, because Dynatrace has log analytics capabilities out of the box with the same one agent.
Yeah, that's great. I hate swivel chairing between multiple different tools.
Yeah.
For sure. We also have, from a response time, just looking at the service layer again, from a response time perspective, you can also look at the response time analysis tool to see where any of those increases may be. In this case, there happens to be an increase in response time degradation, although you see that the increase is very slight. This red section here would just indicate where the increase is happening. And then we do have some top findings, and it shows individually for each of these what the increase in response time would be. So not super significant, but if I do drill down, right now it seems like the overall distribution is spent on services and queues. you can see that this particular, the first top finding here is also identified, just looking at this interaction with services and queues here as the first one to click on.
So if I'm reading this correctly, before my cloud migration, my application was actually a little bit faster. And then after the migration, it's actually 1.3 milliseconds slower. Not sure my users are going to notice that. So I think we're good there. But it's great to have the data to show them.
You know what? I want to highlight one more thing here, because as you move to the cloud and as you re-architect to cloud native, I think one of the things that you try to do more so is that you are replacing certain, let's say, services, like a database that you used to have on premise and you ran yourself. Maybe you first lift and shifted, but then eventually you migrated away to a database as a service, right? Because we've seen earlier, we have RDS and other database as an option. I think this would also then be great to see what's the difference between before, where we were talking with our traditional database, and now as we migrate over to the hosted database. I think that's also another really cool thing. It's a really good use case. Yeah.
That's great. Kayla, what about kind of the user experience side? How would we know, from the user's perspective, what that would look like?
So there are a couple things you can look at. You can look at the AppDex, which would be a measure of success of the application, to see if there's any change there. You could also look at the conversion rate. So we have like the conversion rate 2 weeks before here and the conversion rate in the moment. So we've just selected, if you edit your dashboard, you have the option to select specific timeframes that you can select. So you can see this one is from 2 weeks before, and then this one's for afterwards. So you should be able to see what that change looks like. You can also use, from the user experience perspective, you should be able to use SQL as well. So looking at using queries to determine converted versus converted 2 weeks before, I can create a query for that as well.
That's great. And when it comes down to something like conversion rates, that's really where it's going to impact, the business, not just, technical data, but, conversion rates mean a lot to the business.
For sure.
Great. So I think there's a lot here that, my team can drill through. You mentioned Davis earlier. Can Davis help us with cloud migration as well?
Yes, Davis can help with your cloud migration. Just taking a look at a problem here, we're able to see what the business impact analysis might be on some of these problems as well. So number of users impacted, number of service calls that are impacted from any problems that may arise. So which applications are affected, or entry points that are effective. Typically, Davis analyzes a large number of dependencies in your environment. So you can already see that there's quite a large number here just looking at this environment. But it really does take a look at everything. And we've talked about some of the contextual information that we can bring in from like a log perspective, or like an AppSec perspective as well, or just even additional metrics from the cloud.
That's great. And that deployment there, is that like an event that came in from the outside, or did you guys auto detect that, or what does that kind of represent?
Yeah, it looks like a deployment change that we've seen should be automatically detected in the environment. Looks like it's coming from ServiceNow.
It's really nice.
That's great
because
the tools connected. Yeah,
because it actually tells me, right, in case there's an issue, it automatically correlates events that are the potential root cause, right? I mean, that deployment that was approved by Alice and where the owner is Chuck, potentially had an impact on the bad performance.
Yeah. Great. So Kayla, where can I go for more details, especially on that breaking the monolith section? Is there anybody at Dynatrace that's written blog posts about that?
For sure. Well, we have, Andy Grabner might have written something about it. We can actually take a look here. I guess maybe not.
Yeah. Maybe Office 365 needs some Dynatrace as
Yeah,
well.
I think so. There we go. So we're able to see if you guys want to click on or check out the following link. Or maybe Andy, I don't know if you want to elaborate anymore.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the link should be easy, to copy from here, or as the slides will be uploaded to Dynatrace University, you get the link from there, from the slides, and then click on it. It's really a blog post that we've written, or I think I wrote it, but I think there was a lot of help from people that knew what they're doing when they were breaking the monolith, and we basically just showed some of the steps that you've shown today. But yeah, some more step-by-step instructions, especially if you like to read them with some screenshots. I really do enjoy this video much more than the blog post, I gotta say. But for those people that like reading, go with the blog.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Hey, it's amazing how time flies. I think 30, 40 minutes in, we have, I think what I've learned, not just a little recap. And Lucas, I wanted to mention this in the very beginning, but I didn't want to break your flow. But you mentioned a very important thing that I learned today. You said cloud native does not mean where you run it, but how you run your application. I think that's a very important piece. The first move into the cloud was a lot lift and shift, but you brought some great stats on that. Only 7% of IT costs were actually saved through lifting and shifting. The bigger part is really that you want to leverage cloud technology, whether it's in the cloud or in your data center. Like Kayla, you showed us Kubernetes, you showed us containers, you showed us microservices. I think it's important that we are adapting as an industry these new architectural patterns, and that allows us to move faster. The question is, how can we get from where we are right now to where we want to be? And you've shown us today the whole path with Dynatrace, looking at the data in a monolithic environment, using this data to make decisions on where to break the monolith, and as you're migrating and as you're modernizing, using Dynatrace to validate that the modernization actually pays off. Right? And I think that was really great.
Yeah, that's great, Andy. And Kayla and I have seen this firsthand. There's a customer we both work with that has gone through kind of one of these transformations as well, and actually taking all of their stores, so they're kind of in the retail sector, and they rolled out a Kubernetes cluster to every store. So that kind of gives them the ability to automatically deploy new code into the stores and become very cloud native, completely outside of the cloud. So it really is about how, not where.
Yeah. Cool. Well, with this, I want to again point people to, if you want to follow up with Lucas or Kayla, you got their names. That means you find them on social media. You can also reach out with any type of Dynatrace related questions to the Dynatrace community.dynatrace.com, and make sure, if you haven't yet signed up to Perform, to sign up for Perform 2022. Your breakout is going to be available there at the time of the event, but I think also for registered customers, also for a little while longer, so you can always go back and forth here. And with this, Lucas, Kayla, I'm sure I'll have you back, and we'll talk more about how Dynatrace can help our customers and those that want to become customers in the future to accelerate their cloud migration. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Kayla.
Andy.